So hi everyone. I'll wait a little bit longer for everyone to sort of join. Okay. All right, perfect. Let's get started then. So hi everyone. For any new joiners, my name is Evelyn, and this is part of the Maths GCSE Maths algebra half-term course. So what we're going to start off with doing is we're going to start with going through a recap of yesterday's session on linear and simultaneous equations. And then after our recap, we're going to move on to quadratic equations and solving them. So first off, the recap. Actually, before we start the recap, just a quick reminder. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A, and I'll be reading it throughout the session. When you're answering questions, put your answers in the chat so I can separate the questions from the chat, and it will make it a lot easier to answer any questions you have. And also the session is being recorded, so it will be on the MyTutor YouTube channel. So if there's anything that you'd like to sort of look over, again, make sure that you go to the YouTube channel, and it should be up there by tomorrow, I think. So let's start with the recap. So yesterday we had a look at linear and simultaneous equations. To solve a linear equation, we need to remove numbers and letters. Now, to remove a number or a letter, we need to do the inverse operation, and we have to make sure that it's on both sides that we're doing the inverse operations. Now, when there is an x on both sides, remember we said if we look for the smallest x and we move that one, it'll make the equation easier to solve because we'll get rid of these negative numbers that make equations a little bit more tricky. And then when we're solving simultaneous equations, we need to first make sure that the coefficients of x or y are the same. Then we can add or subtract the equation to eliminate that letter, and then we'll be left with a linear equation, which we can solve to find the value, and then we substitute that back into the original to find the other value. So, by the way, someone's saying my audio is not working. Can everyone hear me? Just let me know if you can or you can't. All right, perfect. If anything, turn up the volume on your computer, then you might, then it might work. Right, perfect. Now, recap question. Now, I know some of you are asking for some more worded problem questions and some more like applying linear equation questions. So here is one. I'd like you guys to have a read of it and then have a go at answering it. And put your answers in the chat when you have one. Let's see what you get. Oh, that's sweet. Someone's asked me, how's my day been? It's been very nice, thank you. Thanks for asking. Right, so we've got some answers coming through. Cool. Right, let's have a look at it then. Let's go through it slowly. So a rectangular flower bed is x plus 2 centimeters in width. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sort of just putting these expressions on my flower bed, yeah? So the width is x plus 2, so I'm going to say over here is x plus 2 centimeters. Now they said the length of the flower bed is 3x. Now, the perimeter of the flower bed is 60 centimeters. what is the width of the flower bed? So obviously they've given us the width, but in terms of x, so it's an expression. But what we also remember is that if it's a rectangle, then opposite sides of the rectangle are equal in length. That's just something that we remember from shapes in maths, yeah? So we know what all of the lengths around the rectangle is in terms of x. We've got x plus 2 and 3x. Now they've told us that the perimeter is actually 60 centimeters. Now we can work out what the perimeter of the rectangle is in terms of x just by adding, because remember, perimeter is adding all the outside lengths together. So we can form a linear equation. We know that the perimeter is 60, and we know in terms of x, it will be 3x plus x plus 2 plus another 3x plus another x plus 2. Now, I'm just going to rub out this 3x on the bottom here so we don't get confused for a second. Right, so we've got this so far. Now we can simplify the expression on the right hand side, and then we're going to solve. So we've got 3x plus x, if I get another color, plus another 3x plus another x. So all these terms have an x in it. We can add all of those together. 3 plus 1 plus 3 plus 1 gives us 8. So we've got 8x. And then we've got the numbers. So we've got 2 and a 2. So we're going to add these two together. So 2 plus 2 is 4. So we've got 8x plus 4. And remember, on the left-hand side, we still have 60. So 60 equals x plus 4. Now this looks just like some of the linear equations we were solving yesterday. So we can go ahead and solve it. So if I use this color. Now I want to get rid of that plus 4 because I said if we have like sort of a plus or a minus in our linear equations, it's better to get rid of those first and then leave the multiplication and division till last. So let's subtract the 4 on both sides. So 60 minus 4 equals 8x. That's what we have on the right hand side. So 60 minus 4 is 56 equals 8x. And then the last thing to do, if I write it over here, the last thing to do is to get rid of that 8. So we can divide both sides by 8. So we've got 56 over 8 equals x, because 8x divided by 8 is x, and 56 divided by 8 is 7. So x equals 7. Now, some of you said that x equals 7. X does equal 7. That's brilliant. The only thing is they've asked us what is the width of the flower bed. Now, remember, the width is x plus 2 centimeters. So not only have we worked out x, but now we need to work out the width. So the final thing to do is just add 2 to the number that we just calculated. So the width equals x plus 2, and x is 7, so it's just 7 plus 2. So our answer is 9. And remember, in your GCSE, if they haven't given you like the units on the end, you also have to remember to put your units as well. So it will be 9 centimeters. Brilliant. So I'm seeing a lot of 9s. Perfect. Right, great. If you guys do have any questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A. Someone did ask, in the exam, will drawing diagrams help you? Of course, definitely. If it's a question, where you can draw like a sort of mini sketch or something, I would always advise to draw it, because usually seeing it helps you to answer the questions a little bit better. With me, even now, I still draw things to make it a little bit easier to explain and to understand. And someone asks, is it in a higher paper? Yes, that sort of question can come up in both foundation and higher. Foundation, it will probably be more towards the middle / end of the paper. Higher, it will be probably towards like the middle / beginning of the paper. So for both exams, it might come up. Right, so what we're going to get onto now is solving quadratic equations. Now we'll be looking at solving by factorization, solving by the difference of two squares, and then we're going to have a look at plotting and interpreting quadratic graphs, and it shouldn't take too long to go through those as well. So first things first, what is a quadratic equation? So a quadratic equation contains terms up to x squared. So all quadratic equations can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are numbers. Yeah, it should say numbers on the end here. So you could have something like 3x squared plus 5x equals 8. That's a squared, that's a quadratic equation. You've got x squared equals 64 and 8x squared equals minus 4x. So usually any sort of equation with an x squared in there, you can probably see as a quadratic. That's for both foundation and higher papers. Right, so someone has asked, will we be doing quadratic formula today? We will not be doing quadratic formula. The reason why I've chosen not to do that actually is because it's not required on both the foundation and higher paper. That's only the higher paper. So this session is more for everyone, not just for the higher GCSE students. So getting on to solving by factorization. So rearrange the quadratic equation so that it's in the form x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, one thing to point out is, regardless of whether you're doing foundation or higher paper, some questions might be a little bit trickier than others, but when you're solving quadratic equations, no matter how it actually looks, I would always say make sure that it's the equation equals 0, because then you can factorize it better. Anytime you're doing factorization and you're solving with factorization, always make it equal to 0. Otherwise, you'll get the question wrong. So always make sure it's equal to 0. Then the next thing to do is to find two numbers that multiply to make C and they add together to make B. And then you can form your two brackets. So you'll have like the first bracket x plus or minus that number, then the second bracket x plus or minus that number. And then the final thing to do, since we're solving, we have to set each bracket equal to 0 and then solve for x. Now we're going to go through an example because it will be a lot easier to understand. Now, the most important thing as well that I've put in the bubble up here is check your answer by expanding brackets. Just like yesterday, if we are solving something or we're factorizing something, we can always expand the brackets or substitute to find out what it's going to be equal to and whether our question is or answer is correct. So let's have a go at the first equation up here. So we've got x squared minus 4x minus 45 equals 0. So it's already in the form. We've got our equation and it's equal to 0. Now we can go ahead and think of two numbers that multiply to make minus 45 and they add together to give us minus 4. So let's think of a few numbers that multiply to give us minus 45. What numbers do you think could multiply to give us minus 45? Two whole numbers, and make sure they are whole numbers. Cool, so we've got a few here. Brilliant. So we could either have minus 9 and 5, because minus 9 times 5 gives us minus 45, or we could have minus 5 and 9. Yeah. Now, the only thing is that we've got these two numbers. Those are really, there are some other ones as well, but we need to think about which sets add up to give us minus 4. So if we check the first one, minus 9 plus 5, that gives us minus 4. But minus 5 plus 9 does not give us minus 4. It gives us a positive 4. So we're going to take the first one. We're going to use these numbers. Now, that is the hard part done already for us. All we need to do is put these numbers in the brackets. So we've got x minus 9 and x plus 5. And then we say equal to 0. That's the hard part with quadratic equations, factorizing them. It's just finding the two numbers that multiply to make minus 45 and add together to give minus 4. Now, since we have to solve it, we're not done yet. We've got our brackets, we've got it equal to 0, we factorized it, but we have to set each individual bracket equal to 0, and then we can solve it. So the first bracket is x minus 9, we're going to set that equal to 0, and then we're going to have x plus 5, and we set that equal to 0. And then we can figure out what is x going to be equal to. So on the left hand side, if you have x minus 9 equals 0, you can add 9 to both sides and you get x equals a positive 9. And on the right hand side, you've got x plus 5 equals 0, so you can subtract 5 from both sides. You've got x equals negative 5. So those are your two solutions, x equals 9 or x equals minus 5, and that would be the answer that you write down. So someone said, let's have a look at these. So someone said you believe it's wrong. Okay, so what I would say is try substituting the numbers into the equation to see if you get 0. Let's do that. So we've got x squared minus 4x minus 45 equals 0. If I put in negative 25, sorry, if I put in negative 5 in there, you get negative 5 squared minus 4 multiplied by your minus 5. Remember to put your numbers in brackets. This is where you'll make mistakes when you don't put your numbers into brackets. Now, minus 5 squared is minus 5 times minus 5, which will make a positive. So that's 25. And then you've got minus 4 times minus 5, which is another positive because you've got two negatives being multiplied together. So you've got plus 20. And then you have minus 45. Now 25 plus 20 gives you 45. So 45 minus 45 is 0. So that's the first one, and we know that that's true. And when you substitute in 9, you also get 0 because you'll have 81 minus 36 minus 45, which will give you 0. So I would say when you're solving, again, just like all the other previous sessions that we've done on Monday and Tuesday, always substitute your answer back into the equation, because then you'll know whether your answer is right or not. And that's the best way to check, and that's how you know whether you get the question right or not, and then you can retry it if you know that it's wrong. So what I would like you guys to do is have a go at the question below and see what answers you get for that one. Remember, when you're solving quadratic equations, sometimes you get 2. A lot of the time you get 2 solutions. So you should get x equals something and x equals something else. There's only a few occasions where you'll get x equals one thing and you won't get another solution. Right, someone said, so while you guys are doing that, just answering some of the questions. Someone said up here there should be a minus 20. Well, I put the 4 times minus 5 in brackets. So 4 times minus 5 is minus 20. And then you've got a minus on the outside. Minus and a minus make a positive. So it's plus 20. So that's why sometimes it helps to put things in brackets and then not skip steps. Obviously, I'm skipping steps just because of time. But try it by yourself. Make sure you put the numbers in the brackets. Also, if you're using a calculator, I can't stress this enough. You do need to put negative numbers in brackets because the calculator will give you a wrong answer. So I'll talk about that a little bit more after we've done this question as well. So someone asked, where did the minus 9 and 5 come from? So when you're factorizing quadratic equations, you need two numbers that multiply to give you this number. So two numbers that multiply to give you minus 45, and two numbers that add together to give you this number. So two numbers that add together to give you minus 4. So minus 9 times 5 is minus 45, and minus 9 plus 5 is minus 4. So that's why we use those two numbers. Right, let's have a look at this question, and then I'll explain the calculator thing in a second. So we need two numbers that multiply to give us minus 33, and they add together to give us 8. Now, if I have a think, we could probably pick, now obviously, I know the answer to this question, so it's a bit easier. And with practice, you'll get a lot quicker. But the two numbers that we're looking for is 11 and minus 3. And I'll show you why. So 11 times minus 3, I'm going to put that negative in brackets, equals minus 33. So that's the first thing done. And then 11 plus minus 3. Now plus and a minus makes a minus. So that's 11 minus 3 equals 8. So we've got our two numbers. Now, the next thing to do is just put those numbers into the bracket. So we've got a positive 11, so that's x plus 11, and we've got a negative 3, so that's x minus 3. That equals 0. Now, the final step to solve is to set each of these brackets equal to 0. And then we solve for x. So x plus 11 equals 0. You subtract 11 from both sides, so x equals minus 11. And then x minus 3 equals 0. You add 3 to both sides, so you get x equals 3. So you should get x equals minus 11 and x equals 3 for your solutions. Brilliant. Right, if you do have any questions about that, make sure to put it in the Q&A. Someone asked, does it matter to put the large number first? It doesn't. You can have x minus 3 and then x plus 3. It really doesn't matter at all. As long as you get those two numbers, the order doesn't actually matter. Right, the calculator thing. If you guys have a calculator near you, what I'd like you to do is put in minus 3 squared into the calculator. And in the chat, just put in what answer you get. So let me scroll down and I'll write down what I'd like you to put in there. Right, minus 3 squared. That's what I'd like you to put into calculator. Right, I'm seeing a range of numbers. All of them have 9s, but some of them are negative 9, some of them are positive 9s. This is the point that I wanted to make. If we forget about the calculator and use our heads, minus 3 squared is the same as saying minus 3 times minus 3, isn't it? Now, a minus times a minus makes a positive, so we should get positive 9. Now, on your calculator, because you're not using brackets, it's just doing minus and then 3 squared. So it does 3 squared first and it puts the minus on afterwards. If you're putting negative numbers into the calculator, make sure you put them in brackets first. So try this. Put negative 3 in brackets and then do the squared, and you should get 9, positive 9 on your calculator. That is probably the most common mistake students make at GCSE just because of the calculator. So make sure negative numbers go in brackets. Right. Now, let's go on to difference of 2 squares. So the difference of 2 squares means you have one square term subtracted by another square term, because difference just means subtract. Yeah. Now, if the quadratic is in the form x squared minus a squared, then we can factorize it, and it will be x plus a, x minus a. And then you do exactly the same thing as we did before. When you have two brackets multiplied by each other, they're equal to 0. You set each bracket equal to 0, and then you solve. So let's have a look at the one below. Now, the tip with difference of 2 squares is if you see your x squared minus a square number, you know to use difference of 2 squares. So let's check. Is 36 a square number? Yes, 36 is the same as saying 6 squared, or 6 times 6. So all we're going to do is we're going to do x plus 6 and x minus 6, and that equals to 0. Yeah, and then we're going to set each bracket equal to 0. So you've got x plus 6 equals 0, and then you've got x minus 6 equals to 0, and then you solve. So on the left-hand side, x plus 6 equals 0. You subtract 6 from both sides, so you've got x equals minus 6. Then on the right-hand side, you've got x minus 6 equals 0, so you add 6 to both sides. So you've got x equals 6. And that is solving with difference of two squares. So if you see something like this, hopefully it doesn't look as confusing anymore. So as long as that number is a squared number, you can use difference of two squares to solve it. Right. Does anyone have any questions about that? Right, someone asked, do you need to put the 0? Right. That's a good question. And this is sort of like an exam technique question as well. If they ask you to solve, that means that it's an equation. So you should have something equals to 0 or equals to another number or something like that. Yeah. If there's no 0, if they ask you to factorize, then you're not solving. You're not working out what x is equal to. You're just putting something into brackets. And that's what we're going to move on to over here. We've got two different questions. So the first one says factorize. It's not an equation. It's just an expression. Yeah, there's no equal sign. So we're not working out what is x equal to. We can only work out what are the brackets that we're going to put down when we factorize it. The second one is solving. So because we have an equal sign, because it's equal to 0, then we need to work out what is x equal to. So what I'd like you guys to do is I'd like you to try both of these questions. Try the first one, factorize it, and then try the second one and solving for x. And then we will have a go and go through them. Okay, so someone's asked, will it always be a square number? Not all the time. Not all the time. For foundation GCSE, it will most likely be a square number. For higher GCSE, it might not, but that's when you use the square root function or the square root to work out what it should be equal to. But if they ask you something like that, the question will be very clear on how to answer it. But we're not going to really cover those sort of questions today because I don't think it really applies to everyone. But if you are doing higher GCSE maths, then be careful because the numbers might not be squared numbers. So be very careful. Right, I'm seeing some good answers here. Someone asks, does it matter which way you put the 6? No. So in the example that we did on the previous slide, it actually doesn't matter which way. You could have x minus 6 and x plus 6, and then you get x equals 6 and x minus 6. It doesn't matter. You just need 2 of the correct numbers. The order doesn't matter. Quadratic equations don't always have squared numbers in it. No, they don't. But you just have to be very confident with the different methods on how to solve them. So one thing I'd like to point out as well, I think I made a brief comment on it earlier. For higher GCSE, you do also need to know how to solve by completing the square and solve by quadratic equation, but we will not be going through that today. Quadratic equation is quite nice. One tip that I would give higher GCSE students is always make sure you have your equation equal to 0 before you do anything else. If you don't, even if you put the numbers into the calculator correctly for the quadratic equation, you will get the answer wrong. So make sure that you rearrange the equation so it's equal to 0. Someone asked, will it be on the calculator paper? Yeah, it could be on Either. It could be on the non-calculated paper or the calculated paper, but this is most likely to be on the non-calculated paper because it's easier to, because it's a little bit easier if you do have a calculator to work these out. Right. Let's have a look at this then. So someone did ask, if the question says factorize, how far do you go through the equation? Well, we're going to go through that now. So factorizing, when they ask you to factorize something, it just means fully factorize it. You don't need to solve. You don't need to get x equals something. You just need to put things in brackets and in the extent where you can't separate it even further. So if we have a look at this, this is a difference of two squares sort of expression. We've got an x squared and then we've got a -4. Now 4 is a squared number, so we can use difference of two squares. Now the first step of difference of two squares is to figure out if 4 is a square number, then what's the square root of it? Now 4 is equal to 2 squared. 2 times 2 gives us 4. So we can put those into the brackets. So x plus 2 and x minus 2. And that is it for this question. All they asked us to do was factorize it. We don't need to solve it. So you just need to have your letters and your numbers in brackets. That's it. This is the answer for the first one. The next one, however, is a solve question. So check both numbers. We've got x squared and we've got minus 144. Now minus 144, or 144 is a squared number. It's 12 squared. It's 12 times 12. So we can have x plus 12 and x minus 12. And remember, it equals 0. It's an equation. They've told us it equals 0. So the next thing that we have to do is set each of our brackets equal to 0. And then the first one, we've got x plus 12 equals 0. So subtract 12 on both sides. So you've got x equals minus 12. And on the right-hand side, you've got x minus 12 equals 0. So add 12 to both sides. X equals 12. And those are your two answers. So be very, very careful. Factorize just means put it into brackets. Solve means find the actual solution. What is x equal to? So hopefully that answers your question. Right, I don't think there's any more questions which particularly about this. If there is, make sure that you put it in the Q&A, but I think majority of you got it. Cool. So right, now we're going to move on to quickly quadratic graphs. Now the only reason why I'm going through it is because some questions ask you to solve something in terms of quadratic equations using the graph. So a quick recap is a quadratic graph is just a graphic representation of the quadratic equation. So the left one is x squared, the right one is minus x squared. If your x squared is positive, then it will be like a smiley face. If your x squared is negative, then it will be like a frown. Yeah, so be very, very careful. You have to know that for both foundation and higher GCSE Maths to be able to recognize which one's a positive one, which one is a negative one. So be very careful with that. Next thing, how to plot a quadratic graph. Substitute the values of x into the equation, find out what the y value is, then plot the coordinates and then draw a smooth curve. Do not use a ruler to draw a smooth curve. It has to be smooth. It can't be made of lines. So if we have a quick look at this question, we're only going to go through one of these. So y equals x squared minus 2. So what I mean when I say substitute your x values, so work out what is y when x is minus 3. Well, y equals, and remember, put those negative numbers in brackets. So the first one, we're just replacing x with minus 3. We're just substituting it. So when x is minus 3, y is minus 3 squared minus 2, which is equal to 9 minus 2, which is 7. So that's our first one. That's going to be 7. Right, the next one we're going to do for when x is minus 2. So remember, put it into brackets. So this is equal to minus 2 squared is minus 2 times minus 2, which gives us 4. Minus 2 gives us 2. So that one's 2. When x is 0, we've got 0 squared and then minus 2. 0 squared is just 0, minus 2 is minus 2. Oops. Then we've got 1, y equals 1 squared minus 2. 1 squared is 1, minus 2 gives us minus 1. And then I'll do it on the other side. Y equals 2 squared minus 2. 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 2 equals 2. And then the last one is 3. So 3 squared minus 2. So we've got 9 minus 2, which equals 7. Brilliant. So we filled out the grid. We know what all the y values are for all the x values. The next thing that we have to do, if I make my pen a bit smaller, is to plot them. So the first coordinate we have is minus 3, 7. So minus 3 is here and 7 is up here. So that's our first coordinate. Minus 2, 2 is over here. Minus 1 is over here. 0 minus 2 is over here. 1 minus 1 is over here. 2, 2 is here, and 3, 7 is up here. So all I've done is I've plotted the coordinates. So once I've worked them out, plotted them, the last thing to do to get full marks is to draw a smooth curve. Now this is going to be difficult, doing it on your computer, but try and get it as smooth as possible. Obviously mine's a little bit wonky just because I'm trying to do it on a computer, but when you have it in front of you, it's a lot easier. I'm really trying here. Let's try this again. There we go. That's a bit better. Now make sure, obviously it shouldn't be wobbly or wonky, but make sure that, thank you, make sure it goes through all of your points. If it doesn't go through all of your points, then you won't get full marks. If you use a ruler, you will not get full marks. It has to be a curve. It shouldn't be lines being put together. So always make sure you're doing it freehand. Yeah, but that's how you plot a quadratic graph. You would lose marks if it's wobbly. If it doesn't look smooth, you will lose marks. But obviously, they're not expecting like a perfect circle or a perfect curve. Obviously, you will have a little bit of parts which are wobbly, but I would say definitely try to do it in pencil. Don't use pen because you will make a mess. Right. It is basically join the dots. The only thing is join the dots, use a straight line. So make sure that you have a smooth curve that goes through all of the points. Yeah, so someone said, so try your best, but don't stress too much. Exactly. So don't spend 15 minutes trying to get the perfect curve, but do try as hard as you can to make sure it's as smooth as possible. Obviously, the examiners will take into account that it's not going to be perfect, but make sure that it's not wobbling all over the place. Right, so the important part which I wanted to get through before we end today's session was the important parts of a quadratic graph, because this is what they could ask you when solving. So 3 important parts. The y-intercept, that's the point where the graph cuts the y-axis. The roots is the part of the graph where it cuts the x-axis, and the turning point is the minimum point of the graph if it's positive. So remember, if it's a positive quadratic graph, it looks like this. So your turning point would be this point right here. And if it's a negative graph, it looks like this. So your turning point would be this point here, the maximum point. So either the minimum point or the maximum point. That's what a turning point is. So literally where the curve sort of turns or changes direction. So if you have a look at this example question, remember the y-intercept is where it cuts the y-axis. The roots is where it cuts the x-axis, and the turning point is the minimum or maximum point in the graph. What do you think the y-intercept, the roots, and the turning points are for this graph on the right? Cool, so we've got a few y-intercepts. What do you think the roots are? Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So we've got some answers. What about the turning points, guys? Cool. Let's have a look at this then. So one big thing with this question is it's asking for the coordinates. So we want an x coordinate and y coordinate in brackets. So if we have a look at the y-intercept, where does this curve cross the y-axis? So it's over here. And this coordinate is 0, -3. So that is our y-intercept. The x part is 0, the y part is -3. Right, the roots, usually there are 2 roots because it's the part where the graph crosses the x-axis. So we've got one over here and one over here, right? Now, those coordinates are -1, 0, and the other one is 3, 0. Now, the turning point, this is a positive because it's like a smiley face. It's a positive graph, so it's going to be the minimum point. It's going to be that point down here, and this point over here is 1, -4. So those are our answers for this particular graph. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Now, sometimes they will ask you to find the roots by factorizing, and the question might be find the roots by factorizing. Right, now one thing that I like to point out is if we have a look at the graph on the left, the equation is y equals x squared minus x minus 2. If we have a look at the roots are where we can obviously tell where the roots are because we've drawn the curve, but one in particular thing is that the roots is where it cuts the x-axis, which means that the y value is 0, right? Because if we have a look at our coordinates over here, our y coordinates were 0, weren't they? Because it goes where y is 0. That's where the x-axis is. This whole line is y is equal to 0. So what we can do is, this is where our solving of quadratic equations comes in. We set y equal to 0, so that's all of the coordinates along the x-axis, and then we figure out what is x going to be equal to. So what we do is we factorize this equation. So we've got 0 equals x squared minus x minus 2. Factorizing it, we need 2 numbers that multiply to make -2 and add together to give us -1. Well, that's -2 and 1, because -2 times 1 is -2. And -2 plus 1 is -1. So we've got our two numbers. The next step is just put those into the brackets. We've got x minus 2 and x plus 1. Then we set each of our brackets equal to 0. Oops. So we've got x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. And remember, add 2 to both sides for the left-hand side. So we've got x equals 2, and then we're going to subtract 1 from both sides on the right-hand side. So x equals -1. And if we have a look at our graph, that's where x is equal to -1 and x is equal to 2. So not only can we just look at the graph, but sometimes they might ask you to solve solve by factorizing to work out what the roots are. So it's always when y is equal to 0. That's just a fact. So if they ever ask you a question like that, just y equals to 0 and then factorize the equation. And remember, your coordinates is going to be 2, 0 and -1, 0. And that would be your coordinates for the roots. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. If it doesn't make sense, do make sure to watch the YouTube video, because all of this is being recorded. It will be on the MyTutor YouTube channel. So make sure to go to the YouTube channel and look for it. It should be up by tomorrow. So before we move on to the Kahoot quiz, because I know some of you are really looking forward to it, just going to go through a few tips. Yeah, so always make sure your equation equals 0 before you try and solve. Always, always, always when it comes to quadratic equations. The square root of a number gives two values, a positive and a negative. So if you ever come across, just quickly go through this. If you ever come across something like this, x squared equals 4. Yeah, this looks just like what we did earlier. Remember, make the equation equal to 0. So what I want to do is get rid of the 4 on the right hand side. I'm going to subtract 4 by both sides. Yeah, and then we can factorize just like what we did earlier, x plus 2 and x minus 2, because this is the difference of two squares. And remember, we got x equals minus 2 and x equals a positive 2. If you go onto your calculator and you do the square root of 4, it will give you 2. It won't give you minus 2. It will only give you one solution. Yeah, but remember, minus 2 times minus 2 gives you a positive 4. So you'll always forget the negative number. So remember, don't always rely on your calculator when it comes to square numbers and negative numbers, because sometimes it can cause you to make mistakes. So be very, very careful with that. When plotting quadratic graphs, make sure your graph is a smooth curve. Do not use a ruler. And there is a difference between sketch and plot. If they ask you to sketch, it means they don't want you to like sort of draw the coordinate axis and do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then draw it really accurately. They just want sort of like what it looks like. Yeah. So whether it's a positive graph, you can literally do something like this. That counts as a sketch, and you could get marks for that as long as you put the important points, like say the turning point, the roots, the y-intercept. That's when you get marks for sketches. A plot, they will give you a coordinate axis, and then they'll give you a coordinate axis, and then you actually have to work out what the individual points are. But we will go through that on Friday, because that's an exam technique sort of question. Now we're on to Kahoot. So log in and go onto kahoot.it and put in the pin, and then we will go through the quiz, and then we'll finish off for today's session. Remember, if you do have any questions throughout the Kahoot quiz, just put it in the Q&A, because I'll be checking it as we go along, and I will try and answer them as best as I can. So someone asks, why does a positive curve equal y equals x squared? A positive curve doesn't always equal y equals x squared. It could be y equals 2x squared plus 3, could be y equals 4x squared plus 4x. As long as your x squared term is positive, if it's minus 4x squared or minus 100x squared, then it's a negative curve, so it will be a frown. But if, as long as your x squared term, so it's a positive number, it will be a smiley face. So that's how you tell the difference between positive and negative curves. Right. Cool. So let's get started. The pin will be at the bottom of the screen. So if you haven't logged in just yet, you can still log in throughout the quiz. So I'm going to get started now. Here we go. So solve the following equation. Remember, two numbers that multiply to make 12 and add together to give us minus 7. And then you have to solve it once you figured that out. So someone asked, why is it y equals x squared and why does it always equal to y? Because you need coordinates. So remember, if you have a coordinate, if you're plotting a graph, you have your x coordinate and your y coordinate. If you didn't have a y, you'd only have x coordinates and you wouldn't be able to plot it on a graph. So that's why it's always y equals and then your quadratic equation, because you have to have an x coordinate and a y coordinate to be able to plot it on a graph. So hopefully that makes sense to you, because x has to be equal to something. Right, so let's have a look. Now, two numbers that multiply to give us 12 and add to give us -7. That is -3 and -4. -3 times -4 gives us +12. And -3 plus -4, plus and the minus makes a negative. So it's -3 -4 gives us -7. So we've got two numbers. But remember, those numbers are the ones that go into the brackets. So you have x -3 and x -4 equals 0. And then you set the brackets equal to 0. So x -3 equals 0, so x equals 3. Then x -4 equals 0, so x equals 4. So always remember when you're solving, once you put it into brackets, set the brackets equal to 0. So if that's still a problem, if we have time at the end, I'll just quickly show you why that one's true. But well done for the top 5. Right, solve this. This is a little bit trickier. So have a go at solving this one. What might help, I'll give you a hint. Usually we have x squared minus something equals 0. Can we divide all the terms in this equation by 4? Maybe that might help. Maybe that might help us get to an answer. So the last one, it wasn't wrong on the Kahoot. Remember, once you put the numbers into the brackets, you have to set them equal to 0. So the first bracket you might have gotten was x -4. You set that equal to 0. X -4 equals 0. So then remember, to solve it, you have to add 4 to both sides. So you've got x equals 4. And that'll be the same thing for the -3 one as well. X -3 equals 0. So x equals 3. I know 90 seconds is a little bit long. There is more than one step to this question. That's why I did give you 90 seconds, and we will be able to finish the quiz as well. Don't worry. Right. It is x equals 5, x equals -5. Divide everything by 4, you get x squared minus 25 equals 0. Then you have a difference of two squares. 25 is 5 squared. So x equals 5, x equals -5. Brilliant. Well done to the top 5. Solve the equation. So x squared plus 10x plus 24 equals 0. So remember, set your brackets equal to 0 and then solve it. Work out what x is equal to. I know a lot of you are asking me to skip. Let's try and give everyone a good amount of time to have a go at answering the question. Some of you might be a bit quicker than others, but let everyone have a go. because we still got some more answers coming in. So, right, let's see. So, brilliant. Yeah, x equals -6, x equals -4. The two numbers that multiply to give us 24 and add together to give us 10 is 6 and 4. Then we set them equal to 0, the brackets equal to 0, and we get -6 and -4. Brilliant. Perfect. True or false? There is one solution to this equation. I would say try it first before answering the question, because you might be surprised by the answer. So don't rush it. It is true. So two numbers that multiply to make 9 and add to give you 6. 3. 3 times 3 gives you 9. 3 plus 3 gives you 6. Then you have two brackets which are exactly the same, x plus 3 and x plus 3. So you have one solution, x equals -3 when you set it equal to 0. So brilliant. Well done for the top 5. Next one, which of the following is a graph? I can't even see the question now. Which of the following is a graph y equals 5x squared plus 3? This one isn't about actually drawing it. This one is about noticing something. Right, it's a positive. So someone did say it's a positive quadratic graph. So quadratic graphs either are a smiley face or a frown face. So they're not going to be the red or the orange one. So it's either the blue or the green one. Now the blue one is a frown, so it's not positive. So it's a green one. So brilliant. Well done for the top 5 for getting that one. Next one, what are the coordinates of the roots of the quadratic equation represented by the graph? So have a look at the graph. Think about what is a root. Brilliant. So have a look at the graph. Where are the roots? We've got -2 and then we've got 3. It's in between 2 and 4. So it will be -2, 0 and 3, 0. Brilliant. Well done for the top 5. Next one, which sketch of the quadratic graph would get you 4 marks? Have a look. Someone said if the curve is located above the x-axis, would this mean it doesn't have any roots? Exactly, because the graph doesn't go through the x-axis. So if it is sort of like floating above the x-axis, it doesn't go through it, that means it doesn't have any roots. Perfect. Right, which one would get you 4 marks? It is none of the above. So first one's first. The blue one is wobbly. It should be smooth. Even though it goes through all of the points, when you go through the points which you've plotted, you should realize that that point is incorrect. The yellow one is straight lines that is connecting all of the dots. You should not use straight lines. You should use a smooth curve. So it is none of the above. Right. Sorry, went a bit quickly. Second to last question, what is the turning point of the following quadratic graph? So have a look at this graph. What is the turning point? What is a turning point? be careful with the way how you write your coordinates. It is -1, -4. Remember, x coordinate comes first. So the point is over here. So x coordinate is -1, y coordinate is -4. Brilliant. So well done for the top 5. We are on the last question. True or false? One of the solutions to x squared minus x minus 56 is equal to 0. Is x equal 8? Is that true or is that false? Is x equals 8 a solution? There's 2 ways of doing this. One's a really quick way, one's a really, it's not really long, but it's a bit longer. And what are we doing tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll be looking at proportion and inequalities. Right. Let's have a look at the answers. So you're absolutely right, it's true. So one way is you could factorize it and try and solve it. And you should have the 2 brackets, x minus 8 and x plus 7. Then you solve it. So x minus 8 equals 0. So x equals 8. Or the other way that you could do it is substitute x equals 8 into the equation and see whether it gives you 0. So you'll have x squared minus 8 minus 56 equals 0. So that'll be 64 minus 8 minus 56, and that does equal to 0. Right, brilliant. So I hope you guys enjoyed today. Well done for Da Vinci coming third place. P-Wen, I hope I'm saying your name right, coming second place, and Bogdan for coming first place. So well done everyone, and the runners up as well, Klaus, Mick, I can't read the whole thing, and Niraj. Brilliant. Tomorrow we will be going through proportion and inequalities, and Friday will be our last session. I know some of you are asking about Saturday and Sunday. Friday is our last session. I hope you guys enjoyed today. We will be going through a recap tomorrow as well before inequalities and proportion. And I hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye everyone.